Hey everybody, welcome to FSMA Fridays, or I think I'm supposed to say happy FSMA Friday. Welcome back to our regulars. Good to have you for the July 2019 edition. And I know we've got a number of new faces joining us each and every month, and excited to see the community keep growing. So I want to welcome all of you who are new as well. Thank you all for being here. We're excited to have you, and we're gonna jam in a lot of really great content. We're going to be digging into the Produce Safety Rule and specifically some great examples that I think will be really helpful for you. So for those of you that are checking us out for the first time or just trying to get a sense of what we're all about, FSMA Fridays has actually been the longest standing industry update. We are, I believe, over 6 years now in running on this, and it's fun when we're out at the trade shows that a lot of you we have met and stayed connected through this. So it's really been a fun community to build and serve. We try and focus on FSMA related news, the reg changes, updates, but we're also moving a lot more into the tactical side and the strategic side and talking about trends and what's really working out there in the trenches and in facilities across the country. And obviously one of the great advantages is our partner with the Atchison Group and being able to bring in their experts, which we certainly have today, and we'll be able to answer your questions. And so as I mentioned, they've been the partner that's really been able to make this happen, someone we work closely with, and we're truly happy to have here again today one of their elite consultants and thought leaders out there in the market, whom I'll introduce here just shortly. A couple of real quick housekeeping tips for the Q&A, which is one of the coolest parts of this. Definitely feel free to send in the questions as they come up. So we really do want these to be for you. We may not get to all of them, and one of the things that we always promise is we will answer the questions offline that we don't get to during the webinar. So if you got a question, please send it over. Those are great to see, and chances are you're not the only one with it. You'll notice that only our team is listed as panelists, so your questions are just coming straight to us. They're not being broadcast to the whole audience there. I'll knock out the first and most common question, which is about the recording. Yes, we are recording today, as we do for all of these. We'll make them available, and in fact, if you want to check out at our website at SafetyChain.com in our resources section, there's a spot for FSMA Fridays where you can actually access the entire library of recordings. So we'll get you out. There's also a lot of really great content in the deck today, so we'll get you a link to that as well. Of course, we're on a webinar tool. If you have any audio issues, I know those never happen, but if they do, you can use the phone or the computer audio. We've got some folks behind the scenes, and here will try and help you out if she can. So what we're going to dig in today, really three things. Quick update on FSMA, some interesting stuff going on there that we're going to cover, and then we're going to do a quick crash course in and around the Produce Safety Rule, talking about sprouts is a really great example for this, and then as always, dig into some Q&A with the time we have here at the end. So I'm really excited to bring in our guest presenter today, Dr. Anabelle Broadbent. She's a rock star in this field, and I think we couldn't have a better person on the line here to talk about food safety, particularly as it relates to the Produce Safety Rule and sprouts. And you can see with her resume, and this is just a small tidbit of what's on there, just a wonderful background in and around microbiology and as a scientist for USDA. So with that, Anabelle, can you hear me okay? And welcome.
Yes. Hi, Brian. I can hear you perfectly, and thank you so very much. Excited beyond belief about joining you today, and looking forward to a great session.
Sounds good. And I know you're literally out in the trenches today. She's joining us from an on-site, so thanks for carving out some time. We're excited to have you. I know you have a lot to share, so we're going to just dig straight in here. And we were just talking offline here a little bit about some interesting stuff going on. So over the last month or so, we like to update the audience on, what your team is seeing. You're very much have your finger on the pulse of the FSMA rules and regs. So any updates that are kind of coming around the office you guys are talking about we should be aware of or thinking about?
Yes, so absolutely. There's lots of exciting things going on, but I'd like to focus our attention today on some of the significant public interest on products that contain cannabis or cannabis-derived compounds, including
Yeah.
CBD. And as there's a lot of, anecdotal evidence and a lot of talk about therapeutic purposes and uses for these compounds. And the reality is that there's many unanswered questions about the science, about the safety, and the quality of these products, including CBD. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight is I think in the latest FDA communications, and there's been a lot of talk in the last few days about next steps and about defining the path forward and about providing the public with and the industry and the stakeholders with guidelines when it comes to expectations for CBD products. So basically paving the way for regulatory clarity, which we have to admit, there is very little clarity in terms of guidelines right now, but the agency has made it public and has made statements that information is coming, guidelines are coming, and the newest time frame and timeline that they're talking about is mid to end of fall. So I think FDA has been doing a lot of recent listening and learning from the stakeholders. As an example, the recent public hearing that they held in May. So I think that is opening the doors and continuing to help FDA's commitment to sound science-based policy. And they're taking their time and doing the rigorous science-based approach in order to then define policy. So stay tuned. Guidelines are coming is what I wanted to share with you this morning.
No, that's great. And actually, I don't know if you're aware of this, and I think you mentioned you're with your colleague, Eric Edmonds, and he's going to be joining us to talk about this very topic on a webinar we're going to be doing in the fall. And I'll double check the dates. Maybe we'll include that in our follow-up. That'll be very timely.
I actually think it's next month, as a matter of fact.
Perfect. Okay, yeah. So that'll tie in really well.
And
excellent.
Also wanted to simply highlight, if you look at the TAG's newsletters, I think there's two of them in the last few weeks that have been published that are covering some of the questions around this particular topic in terms of packaging, labeling, record keeping, and so on. So I encourage the listeners to check out those TAG newsletters. I think they're the ones from July the 2nd and perhaps I think the last one in June 27th.
Perfect.
Good information there.
Yeah, no, those are great. Those are fan favorite for sure. So with that, I'm gonna give you controls here so you can dig into. And I want to let you know I really appreciate the time you put into. Today you're going to cover as much as you can in a short time, but I want to let everyone know that Anabelle also put together a lot of content that you can take away via the slides as well. So thank you for doing that. But
sure.
We're going to dig into your wheelhouse here, right? Produce Safety Rule, Ag, and in particular, I think talking about sprouts is a good segue into that. So I'll let you.
Thank you so much.
Here.
Okay, so now I have the controls. So thanks again, Brian. The focus of our presentation is going to be on sprouts, but I want to, let you guys know that the takeaways are much broader than that. Think of it as using sprouts as the model, as an example, but when it comes to applying the produce safety rule, this is really, very much applicable to other produce as well. But having said that, let's go. I'm going to start with providing the background of what the produce safety rule, requires and it's about. So, as most of the listeners probably know, but I just want to make sure that we all start on the same level, is that it establishes science-based minimum standards for safe growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of fruits and vegetables. So as I mentioned, sprouts is considered a produce. So the produce rule includes sprouts. And what I'd like to do in the next few slides is focus on things that are relevant to and specific to sprout growers, but can still be used and applied by other produce operations as well. So specifically, the covered activities involving sprouts are covered under subpart M, as in Mary, and they have separate compliance dates, and I'm going to go through what those compliance dates have been and are. And they're as I mentioned, subject to all the requirements of the Produce Safety Rule, including specific requirements for Sprouts operations that are noted in that subpart M. So on the next slide, I'd like to highlight what those are. So the key takeaways for the subpart M specific requirements for Sprouts include seeds, specifically the way in which seeds are treated, and also the type of seeds that are used for sprouting. So that we're going to talk a bit more about. And I just lost my screen there for a second. Here we go. I am back. The second point that I'd like to highlight is one, again, that is applicable to all produce growers, and it has to do with looking at the infrastructure and potential sources of contamination, potential niches where foodborne pathogens may reside, and sanitation issues around that. So including both the buildings and the equipment as well. As I mentioned, the seed treatments and sample and test of spent irrigation water. The sprout growers and the sprout industry also test the sprouts themselves. But for today, the purpose of today's presentation, I'm going to focus on some of the key test methods that are being used to test the spent irrigation water and why that is important. Environmental monitoring for listeria and again, applicable to all produce growers, and what are the requirements around that? And finally, maintaining records. What are the type of records that you have to maintain? And as you know, if you are not documenting it, you haven't done it. So really, really important to know what it is that you're required to keep records of, something that we'll look into as well. So let's start with the compliance dates and the food safety risk associated with sprouts. The most recent compliance date is the one in January the 28th, the beginning of this year. And that was really focused more towards the very small businesses. And this is really important to note because as I have spent many hours on actually visiting those very small businesses and mama papa operations, I realized that the unique challenges that these very small businesses face, right? Limited number of resources, so you have to pick and choose as to what you're going to be investing in and what you can do to get the most value for your investment. So we're going to go into some of those things that are very relevant to those very small businesses. And in terms of the sprout, the food safety risk associated with sprouts, I'm going to focus on some of the key ones, and starting with the seeds. So when you look at all the various different outbreaks that have been well documented in the past few years, the most likely source of contamination has always been pointed out to be the seed. So we're going to start there in terms of reducing risk, looking at seed selection and seed treatment. The second thing that makes sprouts highly risky is the fact, in terms of food safety, is the fact that the germination conditions that are used for the sprouts are perfect for the proliferation of pathogens as well. In terms of the temperature, the time, the nutrients that are present, it is just absolutely perfect to encourage the proliferation of potential foodborne pathogens. So beyond that, the sprouts can also be contaminated during production in the way that they're handled, the type of surfaces that they're in contact with, the way that they're packaged, and so on, can also provide opportunities for additional contamination post-germination. And as I had alluded to just a minute ago, there have been many outbreaks associated with sprouts that have occurred in the past few years. And when you look and think about what pathogens have been linked to those outbreaks, Salmonella has been responsible for most of those outbreaks. To a lesser extent, STEC have also been associated with some of those outbreaks. And there are several other microorganisms that I wanted to at least highlight because they have also been shown to be transmitted by sprouts, and that includes Bacillus cereus, Listeria monocytogenes, Staphylococcus aureus, and Yersinia enterolytica have been some of the other foodborne pathogens linked to some of these sprout outbreaks. So what specific needs and what are some of the things that these sprout producing companies should be doing, as well as other produce producing companies. As I mentioned, you don't have a limited resources, so you have to make very, very good decisions as to how you're going to go about identifying the risks and managing those risks. So the first point that I have there is one of the things that even with very limited resources, even very small businesses must be able to do, and that is to take the time to identify the risks and the practices within the production facility, and what are some of the ways in which they can reduce those risks. Beyond that, the second thing that needs to be done is to prioritize the implementation of those practices that are going to be used to reduce the risks. So what should I do first? Should I worry about my E&P program? Should I be monitoring their environment? Should I spend most of my money in testing the spent irrigation water? Should I spend some of the money in actually investing in repairing some of the infrastructure issues that I have, whether there are cracks on the floors or the walls or not having the right type of surfaces to grow the sprouts? How would you, as a small business, prioritize how you're going to go about addressing and managing the risk in your production facility? The second bullet talks about understanding the food safety hazards that are associated with sprout production. So as I mentioned, there are several different foodborne pathogens that have been found associated with sprouts. And this has to do with where they're found in the first place, right? So how these seeds are generated, how they're grown, and how they're sprouted and germinated, all those factors influence whether these foodborne pathogens that are part of the microbial community that is naturally associated with the seeds, whether they're going to have an opportunity to outgrow the native microflora. So understanding the requirements of the Produce Safety Rule, and some of those we have highlighted in the previous slides, and learning about implementing the best practices to prevent sprout contamination. So how do we go about doing that? And what are the best hurdles to approach these complex issues when it comes to growing sprouts, right? I have specifically highlighted some in red, and these are the ones that, given our limited time, I'd like to spend most of my time talking about in the next few minutes. So when you look at multiple approaches or hurdles, there's really two main things as a produce grower or a sprout grower that you should be looking at. The first one has to do with your production environment and the cleanliness and and how you go about cleaning and sanitizing both the equipment and the infrastructure. That's key. You got to start with something that's clean, right? Paying close attention to your employee health and hygiene practices is really important as well, because those could be potential sources of contamination if they're not handling things correctly, or if they themselves are carriers and are exposing the product that is being germinated and produced in your facility. And in red, I have highlighted their GMPs, good manufacturing practices. And this is not trivial. Looking at every single aspect of how the food is handled from beginning to end, from the seeds, from receiving, from storage of the seeds, from germination of the seeds, from the water source that is being used, to the way in which the seeds are handled through the process, how the seedlings are handled. So beginning to end, good manufacturing practices and ensuring that you're doing everything possible to mitigate risk and overcome, that hurdle. The second part of it, the focus is more on sprout-specific risk reduction measures and how do sprout growers reduce risks, food safety risks. Starting again with safe seed, ensure that the seeds that you're using for germination are coming from a reputable, good source. The fact that you're using safe water, so the safety of the water and the quality of the water and how you're going about ensuring that, and whether you're using any sort of filtration system, those are key to start your process in mitigating risk at the very beginning, the seed level. So seed purchasing, receiving, and storage, and it's one of the very first steps that you should focus on in terms of reducing food safety risks. The second part of it has to do, once you have your seed, let's talk about seed treatment. What are some of the ways to mitigate food safety risk by exposing the seeds to either a chemical, a physical, or a biological treatment that will kill or significantly reduce the number of potential foodborne pathogens that may be associated with that seed? So in the next few slides, I have provided you with a couple of, a list actually, well beyond just a couple of various seed treatments that are currently in use, and others that are being, they're still under research and development, but are being considered and are showing great promise in terms of the efficacy of reducing or eliminating foodborne pathogens from seeds that are going to be sprouted. So beyond that, you need to be able to verify that the control measures that you have put in place are actually working. So 3 ways in which you're going to be doing that is by looking at ways to look at sanitation effectiveness. So ways in which you can use either ATP-based technology to look at whether your sanitation is being effective. Are you able to remove all the organic debris from and residue from the surfaces that you're using to germinate the seeds? Your floors, your walls, are you cleaning, and what you're doing, is it working? You need to be able to verify that. Number 2, and it's one that is really, really important, is ways in which you can test both the irrigation, the spent irrigation water and the actual sprouts as the finished product. And these, the results from these tests could then allow you to, hold the product until you receive the results and then release, and knowing that you have, done the verification that your product is, safe to send out, to distribute, and is safe for the consumer to consume. And then finally, the environmental monitoring, specifically for Listeria, and that is to, again, ensure that all the measures that you're taking to control and eliminate Listeria from your environment are indeed working, because you're going to be seeking and looking to see if you can find Listeria within the nooks and crannies, those hard to reach areas, to make sure that you're not harboring any Listeria in your facility that could then potentially contaminate your product. And that environmental monitoring program has to be, and the expectation is that it's going to be a true seek and destroy mode. You want to find it. So if you're looking and you're not finding anything, that's not a good thing. You want to either look in different sites, or increase the frequency at which you're sampling, or increase the number of sites that you're sampling, because you want to make sure that if it's there, you're finding it. And what you do with those results is then you have to be very proactive, and you have to establish or follow corrective actions to eliminate Listeria from your environment, and again, avoid contamination into the final product and or the irrigation water that is being used. So having said all that, in terms of multiple hurdle approaches to reduce the risks associated with sprouts, I'd like to share with you a few slides that highlight some of those things that I talked about. So the first one is a list of antimicrobial treatments for sprouting seeds. And I have divided it into several different slides. The first ones that are in this particular slides are treatments that have been evaluated at pilot and commercial scale. So some of the larger growing facilities are already using some of these treatments, and even some of the smaller scale sprouting facilities are using these treatments. And those include hot water treatment. And I have provided you with with a couple of citations or references that you can look up and familiarize yourself more with what that exactly entails in terms of temperature, in terms of contact time, and what the log reduction that you can expect from that particular treatment is. And the same for the other ones that I have included below, including Tsunami 100 and a couple of others. So my intent is not to, at the moment, go through the specifics of each one of these, but I'm leaving this in the deck. And as Brian mentioned, you have access to the slides and to the recording. So hopefully this is going to be a good resource for you to head you in the right direction and give you a few options to look into when it comes to seed treatments. The other two that I wanted to highlight are other peer-reviewed published treatments that have shown comparable effectiveness as the 20,000 ppm calcium hypochlorite treatment. And in the section below, you see other work that has not been carried out in relation to 20,000 ppm calcium hypochlorite treatment, but show great promise. And one of them specifically that I wanted to highlight is the biological treatments, especially of Pseudomonas fluorescens 279. This work was done in collaboration with my late collaborator at the FDA, Dr. William Fett. And this is specifically the use of competitive exclusion, using, in essence, the good bacteria to fight off the bad bacteria. And this one has shown great promise as a treatment, especially for organic growers that are limited in terms of the chemical treatments that they can use to decontaminate their seeds. So I wanted to bring that one up to your attention and highlight that particular work, and hope that you can follow up with this one particular type of treatment if you're interested in learning more about it. And finally, I have put together a list of validated test kits, and this is again to follow up on the testing of both the spent irrigation water, as well as the actual finished product, and that is testing the sprouts themselves. These are validated test kits for microbial testing of spent irrigation water, the ones on this slide. Some of them have been included in the 1999 FDA guidance that was specifically done for sprout growers, and they include testing for E. coli 0157H7 and Salmonella. And there's other methods that are rapid methods that have been validated specifically for sprouts, and these are ideal because you want to, this is a product that has a very short shelf life, right? So that hold and test program has to be short enough so that you can get the results in a timely manner, so that you can release your product, as soon as possible. So I have listed several that are in use at the moment. There's others, but this is at least to give you a place to get, started. I'm quickly running out of time, so I think I just have a few minutes for questions and answers.
Yeah.
I realize that we only have like 3 minutes left. Sorry about that, Brian.
No, you're doing great. You got through it, and there's a lot of great, like you said, there's a lot of great resources there to take away. I think there's a great question that I think we can take kind of broadly here. Is what you're sharing here, does it also apply to organic sprout production, or do you have any other research suggestions, resources? And this question was in particular about sanitation, but does all this apply to organic, or is there kind of another layer to that?
So yes, part of it does apply to organic growers, and that's one of the reasons why I highlighted some of the seed treatments that have been approved and are being used by some of the organic growers, including the competitive exclusion treatment, the biological control approach. That's one of them. And also keep in mind that there's also several chemicals that have been approved that are on that list that can still be used at the right concentration for the right contact time. The efficacy of those is not as good as some of the others, so that is one of the disadvantages. So you're not going to be getting that 5-log reduction, but if you use it as part of a hurdle approach and not only rely on that as your sole way of reducing, the potential for food-borne microbes, if you use it in conjunction with competitive exclusion and in conjunction with the GMPs and all the other approaches in terms of eliminating those pathogens from the environment, certainly you can reduce the risk.
Excellent. Thank you. That's a great question and great answer. I want to just leave with this, and I think we're going to need to have you back, Anabelle. So I think there's a lot we can do. Yeah, yes, for sure.
There's a lot more I can talk about. Yes.
And that's such a good point, because I had an opportunity earlier this week to tour a very large growing facility in Central California. There's just so many variables at play, so many more challenges. I guess in general, what I'd like to ask you is, what do you see as the biggest challenge or the biggest change happening in produce or even ag in general?
I think one of the biggest things is the focus shifting from, processing and testing to going back to the farm. Because when you think about it, the farm practices and what happens with the various different types of leafy greens, whether you're talking about cilantro, for example, that grows so close to the ground and is in such close contact with the soil, that is where the issues start, right? So the farm practices and anything that you can do at the field level to reduce the risk is a great place to start. And that's where I see most of the focus going into as we move forward.
That's great. We a lot of conversation about that. Yes, that's great. Thank you. Well, you can see how fortunate we are to have experts like Anabelle here. So Anabelle, thank you for putting all that together. We will definitely have you back. One of the things that we mentioned earlier is that we do have all the recordings. We'll have this one up in the coming days. You can go to our resources section at SafetyChain and grab this one along with all the others going all the way back through the entire library of 5-6 years. So lots of great topics in there, many of which are very still much applicable. Anabelle also mentioned for TAG, they have a great newsletter, tons of great content in there. You can sign up for that at atchinsongroup.com, and obviously a tremendous resource if you are looking for some help in and around food safety and a number of other areas for your facilities. They have just a tremendous group that are all over the country in facilities every day that can just add a lot of value. Speaking of value, one of the things we try and do is keep our group together and build our community so we can add value to that. We have a LinkedIn group, so before you hop off here today, if you hop on over to LinkedIn and look up FSMA Fridays, we have a group there. Just submit and we'll get you approved and in. We will share the Q&A there. We'll get you some early access to things and articles and updates. But it's a great opportunity to be able to continue the conversation and hopefully start a conversation amongst yourselves. And last but not least, we'll do this again just about a month from now on August 23rd. And really looking forward to having you all back for that. So Anabelle, thank you again for a wonderful presentation. Thanks to all of you for being here today. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next month. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.